I gave him everything. My time, my love, my years of struggle. Every brick of that house was built with my hands, every wall painted with my dreams for his future. But when success came his way, something changed in him. My sweet little boy turned into a stranger. One morning I woke up to find the house deed transferred. To his name? My name erased, my place gone. He said it was for convenience, but soon I realized he wanted me out. My heart shattered, but I stayed silent. I watched him celebrate in the home that once echoed with my laughter. He thought I was powerless. He thought I'd walk away quietly. But what he didn't know was a mother's silence is not weakness. It's the calm before the storm. And when karma arrived at his doorstep, I was the one holding the key. The rain was pouring that night, soft against the half-built roof, as she stood holding an umbrella in one hand and a dream in the other. The woman, her name was Martha, stared at the small, unfinished house, her heart swelling with pride and exhaustion. Every brick, every nail, every stroke of paint told her story, a story of survival, loneliness, and love for the son she raised alone. She could almost hear his laughter echoing through the empty rooms, just like when he was a little boy chasing butterflies in their backyard. The smell of wet cement mixed with her tears as she whispered, "This is for you, Daniel, our forever home." The cold wind brushed her cheek, almost like a warning she didn't understand yet, that even the warmest home could someday turn cold. Years passed, and the house came alive with memories, birthdays, laughter, quiet dinners after long days at work. The living room was filled with photos of Daniel, his innocent smile frozen in time. Martha's days were simple but full. The hum of the washing machine, the ticking of the clock, and the soft creak of wooden floors beneath her tired feet. She believed her son would someday return the same love she poured into his world. "You'll have this house one day," she'd often tell him, and he'd smile, half listening, lost in his phone. Still, she didn't mind. She thought youth was just busy, not ungrateful. But as nights grew quieter and Daniel stayed away longer, the home began to feel like a museum of old love, beautiful but forgotten. The ticking clock grew louder, like it was counting down to something unseen. It started small, a change in tone, a cold glance. Daniel no longer came home with warmth in his voice. Instead, he carried an air of impatience, as though every conversation with her was a waste of time. Martha noticed the way he looked around the house, not with nostalgia, but with calculation. One evening, she overheard him speaking on the phone. Yeah, it's under her name. But that can be changed. Her heart skipped a beat, unsure if she heard it right. She laughed it off at first, telling herself he was joking. But when she caught him staring at the property papers on her desk, the laughter died in her throat. The rain returned that night, tapping against the window, soft, rhythmic, and unsettling, as if warning her again. The city had changed Daniel. When he visited after months away, he didn't even knock, he just walked in, his phone glued to his ear, his suit sharp and new. The smell of expensive cologne filled the living room, replacing the faint scent of home-cooked meals that once lingered there. Martha watched him from the kitchen doorway, her wrinkled hands still wet from washing dishes, her heart swelling with pride and unease. He talked loudly, boasting about deals, clients, and a new house his friend had bought. When she tried to ask how he was doing, he brushed her off with a quick, "Busy, Mom, you wouldn't understand." That line echoed in her chest like a crack in glass. For the first time, she realized her little boy wasn't little anymore, and maybe he wasn't hers either. Dinner that night was quiet except for the clinking of cutlery. Daniel scrolled through his phone between bites, barely glancing up. Martha smiled softly, asking about his work, trying to connect, but he only gave half answers, distracted and restless. When she mentioned the house, how proud she was to have built it alone, his eyes flickered with something strange, almost irritation. "You should have sold this place years ago," he said coldly, his tone casual but sharp. Martha froze. "Sell this house?" she whispered. He shrugged, sipping his drink. "It's old, Mom. You could move somewhere smaller. I could handle things for you." The room felt colder after that. The ticking clock grew louder again, matching the quickening of her heartbeat. And for the first time, she wondered, was her son helping her or setting something in motion? In the following weeks, strange voices began to echo through the phone when Daniel called, laughter. A woman's voice, talk of money and investments. He began visiting less, always in a hurry, always distracted. When he did come, he brought that same woman, Lena, who smiled too politely and called Martha ma'am instead of mom. They talked about property values, documents, and modernizing assets. Martha sat in silence at the edge of the room, feeling invisible in her own home. The walls that once held warmth now felt like strangers, cold and watchful. One night, she overheard Lena whisper, "She'll sign it. Just make it sound like it's for her protection." The words chilled her to the bone. But before she could confront them, Daniel caught her eyes and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, Mom, it's just business." But deep inside, she knew business was just another word for betrayal waiting to happen. The next morning began with sunlight creeping softly through the curtains, the kind of morning that looked peaceful, but carried something poisonous beneath. Daniel arrived early, holding a bag of Martha's favorite pastries, his voice unusually sweet. "I thought we could have breakfast together, Mom," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Martha was surprised, even moved, though a flicker of unease stayed in her chest. They sat together at the old dining table, the same one she bought when Daniel was 10. Between bites of warm bread and coffee, he began to talk, softly, carefully, like someone trying to guide her thoughts. He spoke about responsibility, about managing things better, and how papers should be organized to avoid problems later. Martha nodded, not fully understanding, her trust blinding her to the hidden edge in his words. When he placed the folder on the table, it looked harmless, just a few papers with her name and his. "It's just for safety, Mom," he said gently. "If something happens to you, I can take care of the house." The words sounded loving, but the way he avoided her eyes felt wrong. That evening, the folder still sat untouched on the corner of the table. The golden light from the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, and Martha stood there, staring at it. Something in her gut whispered, "Don't sign," yet her heart, heavy with motherly faith, said otherwise. She thought about all the nights she stayed awake when he was sick, all the sacrifices she made. Surely her son, her own blood, would never harm her. So when Daniel came again that night, papers ready and pen in hand, she smiled weakly. "You really trust me, right, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. She laughed, a small trembling laugh. "Of course, Daniel. You're all I have." Her hand shook slightly as she signed each page, her pen scratching across the paper with a quiet finality, a sound that echoed louder in her mind than thunder. When she handed the papers back, Daniel's eyes gleamed, not with warmth, but with victory. The clock ticked 3 times, each one sounding heavier than the last, as if the house itself felt what she had just done. Days passed quietly. Too quietly. Daniel didn't visit as often after that. When Martha finally asked about the papers, he assured her everything was fine. "Just legal stuff, Mom. Don't worry." But his tone was distant, dismissive. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was a notice about property registration changes. Martha opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Her eyes scanned the lines and froze. Her name was gone. The owner's name had changed. Daniel's name. Her knees went weak as she dropped the letter, her breathing turning shallow. The world around her blurred. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening to her heartbreak. When Daniel returned that evening, she confronted him with the paper clutched in her shaking hands. He sighed, not guilty, not scared, but annoyed. "Mom, don't make this a big deal. It's just paperwork. The house is safer under my name now." Martha stared at him in disbelief. Her son's face looked different now, colder, sharper, like she was speaking to a stranger wearing her child's skin. And as he walked away, humming casually, she whispered under her breath, "You've taken my home, Daniel. But what else will you take?" The morning started too quiet. No birds sang outside, no kettle whistled, even the wind seemed afraid to move. Martha woke to the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, unfamiliar. When she stepped out of her room, she found two strangers in suits standing near the living room, holding clipboards. Daniel stood beside them, his arms crossed, his expression stiff. "Mom, these are property officers," he said flatly. "We just need to finalize some things." She blinked, confused. "Finalize what?" He looked away. "You'll need to move out for a while." The world tilted. For a moment, she thought she misheard him. But the officer's next words shattered that hope. "Mrs. Carter, you're no longer listed as the legal occupant." Her name erased. Her home taken. The walls that once held her laughter now echoed with the silence of betrayal. The next morning, Martha cooked breakfast one last time. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the house, a quiet ritual she had done for years. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging her presence. The ticking of the clock felt louder than usual, each tick slicing through the air like a knife. She placed a plate before him. "Eat something," she whispered. He didn't even look up. "You don't need to do this anymore, Mom. I've got everything handled." Her hands trembled. "Handled? You mean my house, my life?" He sighed, frustrated. "You'll have somewhere to stay. I'll help you rent a small apartment until things settle." Martha stared at him, tears building. "Until things settle?" "Daniel, this is our home." But he didn't answer. He just stood up, adjusted his tie, and left without finishing his food. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded more final than any goodbye. The eggs went cold, untouched. And as she sat alone, she realized she wasn't just being pushed out of a house. She was being erased from her own story. That afternoon, Martha packed her belongings into 3 old suitcases, clothes, photo albums, and a few keepsakes. Every corner she passed carried memories that clawed at her heart. Daniel's first drawing still pinned to the wall, the dent on the floor from his childhood toy car, the faded curtains she once sewed by hand. Outside, a truck waited silently. The air felt heavy, the clouds thick and gray. When she stepped out onto the porch, Daniel stood there with his arms folded, pretending to look busy on his phone. "It's for the best, Mom," he said without meeting her eyes. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw no trace of the boy she had raised. Only a stranger wearing his face. As the truck drove away, she turned to see the house shrinking behind her. One window still open, curtains fluttering like a silent wave goodbye. Her vision blurred with tears, but even through them, she noticed something. Daniel had already locked the front gate. And in that moment, she understood. She hadn't just lost her home. She had lost her son. The small room smelled of damp walls and loneliness. Martha sat on the edge of a narrow bed, surrounded by boxes she hadn't opened yet, her whole life folded into cardboard. The single light bulb flickered weakly, throwing trembling shadows across the cracked paint. Outside, traffic hummed, distant and uncaring. Inside, the silence pressed against her chest until it hurt to breathe. She missed the rhythm of her house, the creak of the old stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint ticking clock that once annoyed her. Now the only sound was her own heartbeat and the slow dripping of a leaking faucet. She picked up a framed photo from one of the boxes, her and Daniel on his graduation day, both smiling. She touched the glass gently, whispering, "You were so proud then." "What changed, my son?" Her voice cracked, and the only reply was the echo of emptiness. She placed the frame down carefully, afraid even her sadness might break it. And for the first time in her life, Martha realized what true loneliness felt like. Not being alone, but being forgotten out. The days bled into each other, gray, heavy, silent. Martha tried to keep herself busy, but every little thing reminded her of the life she'd lost. She made tea, but it didn't taste the same. She folded clothes that didn't smell like home anymore. Each night, she sat by the window watching the lights of the city flicker, thousands of homes glowing in warmth, while hers was gone. She wondered if Daniel ever thought about her, if guilt ever knocked on his conscience. But every time she called, his number rang without answer. One afternoon, she walked past her old neighborhood. The house stood tall and perfect, but the windows were closed, the garden neglected. The laughter that once filled it had died. She stood at the gate, trembling. The neighbors glanced, whispering softly, pity, curiosity, judgment. And then, from inside, she saw Daniel's silhouette at the window, and a woman's laughter. Her hands gripped the gate so tightly her knuckles turned white. That laughter, carefree, cruel, chased her all the way back to her tiny room. That night, she didn't cry. She just stared at the ceiling, silent, her eyes dry and distant. Something inside her had broken, but something else had begun to awaken. Weeks later, while sorting through her papers, Martha found an old envelope, the house's first purchase documents. Her name was still printed there, bold and proud. She traced it with her finger, whispering, "This was mine." It still is. That night, she dreamt of the house again, but not as it was. In her dream, the walls were cracking, lights flickering, and Daniel's voice echoed inside, calling for help. She woke up gasping, heart pounding, sweat on her forehead. The dream lingered, heavy and strange, part fear, part warning. She realized she could keep drowning in grief, or she could rise. And slowly, that old quiet strength, the kind that builds homes, that survives storms, began to return. The next morning, she dressed neatly, combed her hair, and walked out into the sunlight for the first time in weeks. Her eyes were tired but steady. She whispered to herself, "You took my home, Daniel, but you haven't taken everything." And as she locked her small apartment door behind her, her reflection in the dusty mirror didn't look broken anymore. It looked determined. The morning was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain. Martha walked through the city's narrow streets, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. Her old hands clutched a folder, the last few papers she still had with her name printed on them. She stopped in front of a small law office, the name on the sign faint but familiar. William Hayes, attorney at law. She hadn't seen him in nearly 20 years. Inside, the office smelled of paper, ink, and memories. The old lawyer looked up from his desk, his eyes widening in recognition. Martha Carter. My God, it's been ages, he said, standing quickly. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. I wouldn't be here unless it was important, Will. He gestured for her to sit, and as she lowered herself into the chair, she placed the folder before him. My son took my house, she whispered. For a long moment, William said nothing. The ticking clock filled the silence until he finally spoke, voice low and careful. Tell me everything. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, quiet, deep, like the sound of truth stirring from its sleep. For nearly an hour, Martha spoke. She told him about the morning Daniel brought the documents, how she had signed them, how her name had vanished. William listened without interruption, his face unreadable as his fingers traced the edges of the papers. When she finished, he adjusted his glasses and pulled out a magnifier. His eyes scanned the documents slowly, his brows tightening. These aren't transfer confirmations, he muttered. They're ownership replacements. He didn't safeguard your property, Martha. He took it. Her throat went dry. But I signed where he told me to. William looked up, his tone both kind and grave. He tricked you. You gave full rights away. The room seemed to shrink around her. The fan above creaked, spinning lazily, each turn echoing in her ears like the words stupid over and over. William continued softly, but maybe not everything is lost. If he bypassed legal procedure or used fraudulent means, we can challenge it. Martha leaned forward, trembling. Fraudulent? He nodded. I've seen this before. Greedy children forging authority, misusing trust. But you need proof. Martha exhaled slowly, her voice hollow. Then I'll find it. And as the rain finally began to fall against the window, the sound of it felt different this time. Not mournful, but rhythmic. Like the beat of a plan beginning to form. The office grew darker as evening set in. Streetlights flickered outside, their glow painting faint gold lines across the room. William sat across from her, flipping through the final page of the folder. His expression shifted, subtle but enough for Martha to notice. What is it? She asked. He turned the document toward her and tapped a section near the bottom. The property wasn't transferred using a standard family deed. He used a business form. Martha frowned. What does that mean? William leaned back, his chair creaking. It means he made himself the sole owner, but he listed your house as an investment property, which means taxes, legal filings, and paperwork he probably ignored. If that's true, he's sitting on a time bomb. Her pulse quickened. For the first time in months, her heart didn't ache. It raced. William smiled faintly, the corner of his lips twitching. If we did carefully, we might not just get your house back. We might take his reputation with it. Martha stared at the paper, her reflection faintly visible in its sheen. The storm outside grew louder, thunder crawling closer. She closed the folder gently and whispered, almost to herself, "Then it's time my son learned what happens when you steal from your own mother." A week later, Martha returned to the old neighborhood under the disguise of ordinary errands. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and car exhaust. Her once vibrant garden had wilted, the paint on the gate beginning to peel. Through the half-drawn curtains, she could see Daniel's silhouette pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. Every few minutes his voice rose, sharp, impatient, then dropped again to a hiss. She lingered by the fence, pretending to check her bag, listening. Words drifted out through the cracked window. The investors need proof of ownership. I told you I have it. Her pulse quickened. He was using the house, her house, as leverage for business. When he suddenly turned toward the window, she looked down fast, pretending to tie her shoe. For a brief moment, their eyes almost met, but he didn't recognize her under the wide hat and scarf. She straightened, walked away slowly, heart pounding, thinking, every lie leaves footprints. I just have to follow them. Over the next few days, she moved quietly, almost invisibly. She visited the local records office, the post clerk, the tax department. With William's guidance, she collected copies of forms, dates, and signatures, all small pieces that began to reveal a pattern of deceit. Each night in her tiny room, she laid the papers out on the table like a puzzle. The rain outside became her soundtrack. The flicker of the lamp, her metronome. She found dates that didn't align, statements signed on days Daniel wasn't even in town. Every discovery tightened her chest, anger mixing with grim satisfaction. When exhaustion threatened to break her, she whispered to herself, "He thought I was weak. He forgot who taught him to fight." And as she stared at the growing pile of evidence, she realized silence was her greatest weapon. Martha began visiting the park across from her old house every evening. She sat on the same bench, feeding birds, pretending to be just another lonely old woman. But her eyes never left the house. She watched people come and go, bankers, realtors, delivery men. She noticed Daniel's nervous habits, checking the mailbox twice a day, locking the gate twice each night. He was hiding something. One afternoon, she saw Lena storm out of the house, shouting, "You promised me it was ours," before driving away. The argument echoed in Martha's ears long after the car disappeared. She knew then that the walls of Daniel's empire were cracking. All she had to do was give them a little push. That night, she called William again. Her voice was calm, almost serene. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's begin." And as she hung up, lightning flashed outside, illuminating her reflection in the window, no longer broken, no longer helpless. Just quiet, focused, waiting. Daniel woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing nonstop. Emails, missed calls, messages. His business partner, his bank, his lawyer, all demanding answers. Something was wrong with the property papers. The ownership file he'd submitted had been flagged for review. He stumbled into the kitchen, barely noticing the dishes left unwashed or the half-eaten dinner from last night. Lena sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, face pale. "Daniel, did you lie about the house?" she asked quietly. He froze. "What are you talking about?" She turned the screen toward him, an email from the property office. "Ownership validation pending. Discrepancies found." He forced a laugh. "It's a mistake." "I'll fix it." But his voice trembled, and she noticed. As he stormed out of the room, she whispered to herself, "Something's not right. And I think you know it." The air in the house felt colder that morning, as if the walls themselves had begun to listen. By midday, Daniel was in his office, papers spread everywhere. His lawyer's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Daniel, I don't know who brought this up, but there are inconsistencies in the transfer. Someone's challenging the signature." Daniel slammed his fist on the desk. "That's impossible. Everything was legal." But deep down, he knew whose hand might be behind this. His mother's quiet, unwavering eyes haunted him, the way she'd looked at him before leaving. The lawyer continued, "Until this is cleared, the property is frozen. You can't sell or mortgage it." The words hit him like a blow. His plan, the business expansion, the investors, everything depended on that house. He looked out the office window, rain streaking the glass, and saw his own reflection, tired, hollow, unraveling. Then his phone vibrated again, a message with no name, just a line of text. "You built your life on my roof." His stomach twisted. No number, no name, just the message. And when he looked again at the glass, he could swear a faint outline of his mother's face flickered in the reflection, then vanished. That night, Lena confronted him again. "Daniel, tell me the truth. Whose name is that house really under?" He snapped. "Mine." "It's mine." But his eyes darted away as he said it. Lena took a step back, voice trembling. "You forged it, didn't you?" "You used your own mother's trust for money." Her accusation sliced through the room. Daniel tried to grab her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't touch me," she whispered. "You're a liar." As she stormed upstairs, the silence that followed was unbearable, thick, suffocating. He poured himself a drink, staring at the house keys on the counter. The lights flickered once, twice, and for a moment he thought he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, no one. Just the faint sound of the wind through the hallway, carrying a whisper that sounded eerily like, "Everything you took will return." The glass in his hand cracked under pressure, spilling red wine that looked too much like blood. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the spreading stain. Morning light slanted across the doorway when Daniel opened the front door to leave for work, and there it was. An old rusted key. He froze, staring down at it, his heart hammering in his chest. It wasn't just any key, it was that key. The one his mother used, the one he swore he'd taken years ago. He looked around. The street was quiet. No one in sight, just a stray cat crossing the road and the distant sound of a garbage truck. He picked up the key slowly, his hands trembling. It was cold, colder than it should have been under sunlight. He whispered to himself, "How did this get here?" Inside, Lena's voice called from the kitchen, "Daniel? What's wrong?" He shoved the key into his pocket and forced a smile. "Nothing. Just mail." But as he walked away, his fingers brushed the sharp edge of the metal, and a drop of blood bloomed on his thumb. Daniel sat in his office later that day, the key lying on the desk beside his phone. He couldn't focus on work. His partner, Michael, was talking numbers, but all Daniel heard was the faint metallic clink of that key when it hit the table. Finally, unable to bear it, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months, his mother's. The tone rang once, twice, and then stopped. A voice answered, soft, calm, familiar. "Daniel!" He froze. "Mom." Silence. "Mom, are you?" Click. The line went dead. He stared at the phone, disbelief spreading across his face. That number should have been disconnected. He had canceled her old plan himself. He dialed again. This time the call wouldn't even go through. Number unavailable. Then, just as he set the phone down, a text appeared on the screen. "You can't lock out the one who built the door." That evening, Daniel arrived home to find Lena packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She looked up, eyes red from crying. "I can't live like this anymore." "You're hiding something from me and it's tearing this place apart." He tried to explain, but his words tripped over themselves, excuses tangled in fear. Finally, she said it quietly, almost tenderly. "You took something that wasn't yours. Maybe now it's taking something back." She closed the suitcase and left without another word. Daniel stood in the empty living room as the front door clicked shut. The ticking clock echoed louder than it ever had before. Then, from somewhere deep in the hallway, came the sound of a door creaking open, slowly, one he hadn't opened in months. The guest room door. He walked toward it, each step heavy, the floor groaning under his weight. When he reached it, the door stood ajar, and on the bed sat a single envelope. Inside, written in a hand he knew too well, "You took my home. Now I'm taking it back." That night, rain lashed against the windows like tapping fingers. Daniel couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards felt louder, closer. The house that once made him proud now felt like it was watching him, listening. He got up, pacing through the halls barefoot. The air smelled damp, almost rotten, as if something deep inside the walls was decaying. He reached the kitchen. The light flickered twice, then steadied. A glass on the counter trembled, barely noticeable, but enough to freeze him mid-step. He picked it up, trying to steady his breathing. "It's just the wind," he whispered to himself. But then he noticed something strange. The window was open, though he was sure he'd blocked it earlier. Rain blew in, soaking the curtain. He shut it hard, then turned toward the reflection in the dark glass, and saw someone standing behind him. He spun around. No one. Only the echo of his own ragged breath daubed by morning. The unease hadn't lifted. It had worsened. The power flickered on and off throughout the day, and the lights dimmed every time he walked past the living room. He tried to distract himself by turning on the television, but the static buzzed like a whispering crowd. Suddenly, through the noise, a faint voice broke through, low and clear. "Do you remember the day you signed it, Daniel?" He jumped up, switching the TV off immediately. His heart thundered in his chest. The screen went black, showing only his reflection, pale, wide-eyed, trembling. The words kept replaying in his mind. He checked every corner of the room, even behind the furniture, half expecting to find hidden speakers or someone's prank device. Nothing. The house was empty. Completely empty. But when he turned to leave, he noticed muddy footprints trailing behind him. Prints that didn't match his shoes. That evening, Daniel sat in the study, the same room where he'd forged the papers years ago. He poured himself another drink, but his hand shook too much to hold the glass steady. He glanced around the room, at the documents, the bookshelves, the faint scratches on the old oak desk. Everything here had once belonged to his mother. For the first time, guilt began to claw through the fog of anger. He whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I just needed to survive." The silence swallowed his confession whole. Then, click. The door behind him shut by itself, slowly. He turned, every hair in his neck standing up. The key, her key, was still lying on the desk. And as he stared at it, it began to rattle against the wood. Not violently, just tapping, steady, like a heartbeat. He backed away, eyes wide, until his back hit the wall. The tapping stopped. Then a faint creak came from upstairs, the sound of the attic door opening. The stairs groaned under Daniel's weight as he climbed, one hand gripping the old railing. The light from his phone barely cut through the darkness. The beam trembled along the walls, revealing old picture frames draped in dust. Each step felt heavier than the last. He could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock downstairs, muffled by distance, like a heartbeat fading away. When he reached the attic door, it stood open just enough for the cold air to seep out, smelling of mothballs and old paper. He hesitated, whispering, "It's just the wind." Just the wind. But deep down he knew it wasn't. The air felt thick, almost watching. He pushed the door open. The hinges cried out a long, low groan. Inside, the darkness seemed alive, and his phone light flickered weakly as if it didn't want to reveal what lay ahead. And then he saw it, the small chest in the corner. His mother's, the one she'd always told him never to open. He knelt down before it, wiping away the layer of dust. The latch was rusty but not locked. His trembling hands lifted the lid, and a faint scent of lavender drifted out, so familiar it made his throat tighten. Inside lay a collection of neatly folded letters, old documents, and photographs. He picked one at random, a photo of him as a boy, sitting on his mother's lap in the garden, both smiling. Under it, a letter addressed to my son, for when he forgets. His breath hitched as he unfolded it. The paper was soft and yellowed, the handwriting graceful and steady. Daniel, this home is more than walls. It's where you took your first breath, where your father's laughter lived, and where my heart still does. If one day you take it from me, remember, I will forgive you only when you understand what you've lost. The letter slipped from his fingers. His hands were shaking violently now. He whispered, I didn't mean to. But the attic was silent, except for a faint creaking sound behind him. He turned slowly, every instinct screaming not to. The beam of his phone caught a shadow in the far corner, a figure faint, unmoving. It looked like a woman, her outline soft, familiar. Mom? He breathed. The figure didn't answer. It only seemed to tilt its head slightly, as though studying him. He took a step forward. The floorboards moaned. The air grew colder. Please, he whispered. I'm sorry. The light flickered, and when it steadied, the corner was empty. Only the chest remained. And sitting on top of it now was something new, a folded piece of paper he hadn't seen before. His name was written on it, in fresh ink. Heart pounding, he opened it. The truth lives here. Come home? He dropped the letter and stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The attic light, the one that hadn't worked in years, suddenly clicked on by itself, flooding the room in pale, humming light. And on the far wall, words had been scratched into the wood, faint but unmistakable. You took everything. Rain poured in sheets, turning the world silver and blurry. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, the cold soaking through his clothes, the sound of thunder echoing across the empty street. And there she was, Martha. Her black umbrella tilted slightly against the wind, her gray coat clinging to her frame. She looked smaller than he remembered, but her eyes were fierce. For a long, terrible moment, neither spoke. The rain hissed between them, dripping from the roof, splattering onto the doorstep that once belonged to her. Finally, Daniel found his voice. What are you doing here? Martha's voice was steady, too steady. I came home. He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. This isn't your home anymore. She tilted her head, studying him like a stranger. Is that what you keep telling yourself at night? The wind shifted, blowing rain between them, but neither moved. In the silence that followed, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath, without another word. Martha stepped forward and crossed the gate. Her shoes sank into the wet ground, and each step toward him echoed like a drumbeat. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You don't belong here. I built this house, she said quietly, her eyes sweeping over the familiar walls, the cracked windows, the flowers she once planted now half dead. I bled for it. And you sold it for greed. Her words struck like knives. He turned away, muttering, You don't understand what I've been through. I understand everything, she said, her voice trembling now with pain, not anger. I understand that you took from the only person who ever gave you everything. He turned back to face her, his expression breaking. Guilt, pride, shame, and fury all at war behind his eyes. Why couldn't you just forgive me? He whispered. Martha stepped closer, rain dripping from her umbrella, her voice barely above the storm. Because you never asked for forgiveness, you just took. The air between them crackled, alive with memory and regret. Daniel's breath came fast and shallow. What do you want from me, Mom? Money? The house? It's all worthless now. She shook her head slowly. I don't want your money. I want you to remember who you were before greed made you forget. He laughed bitterly, stepping closer until they were face to face under the trembling porch light. You think this is about greed? I did this because you never trusted me. You never believed I could do anything on my own. Her expression softened, but her eyes glistened with tears. You were my everything, Daniel. I gave you everything. And when I had nothing left, you still wanted more. His voice broke. I just wanted to win. For once I wanted to matter. Lightning flashed, the light illuminating both faces, streaked with rain and grief. Martha whispered, You mattered the day you were born. You just forgot it. A long silence followed, thunder rumbling low in the distance. Then, without warning, Daniel's knees gave out. He sank onto the wet porch, covering his face with his hands. And Martha, despite everything, stepped forward and placed her trembling hand on his shoulder. For the first time in years, she whispered his name not in anger but in sorrow. Daniel! He looked up at her, eyes red and broken. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air like a confession to the walls themselves. But somewhere inside, the house creaked, a slow, heavy sound as if it, too, was waiting for what came next. As Martha stepped inside, the air shifted. It was subtle, like a sigh after years of silence. Dust hung in the air, thick and golden under the flickering light. The scent of damp wood mixed with faint traces of lavender and something else. Old paper, memory, regret. Daniel followed behind her, hesitant, almost afraid. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and every sound seemed too loud, too present. This place, Martha murmured, looking around. It still smells the same. Daniel swallowed hard. It's just a house. She turned, her eyes cold. Then why does it still know our names? He said nothing. They stood in the hallway, facing the family photographs still hanging on the wall, untouched, uncleaned. The faces inside smiled eternally, frozen in better times. Martha reached out, tracing a frame with her finger. You left everything just as it was. Daniel's voice cracked. I couldn't change it. She looked at him, seeing the fear beneath his anger. Because you knew changing it would make it real. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. They moved through the rooms, the kitchen, the living room, the old study. Each space seemed heavier than the last, filled with the ghosts of laughter, argument, and time. The walls seemed to echo every step, every whisper. When Martha passed the study door, it swung open slightly, groaning like an old wound reopening. Inside, the papers Daniel had forged years ago still lay on the desk. Martha's eyes lingered on them. You even kept the lie close to you? Daniel clenched his jaw. I couldn't destroy it. It felt like proof that it happened. Like I could control it. Martha walked to the window and looked out into the rain. You never controlled anything, Daniel. You just buried it. The silence that followed was sharp, almost electric. Then, somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed shut by itself. They both froze. No wind, no draft, just that sound, echoing down the hallway like judgment itself. Daniel whispered, It's this house. It's you. Martha shook her head slowly. No, Daniel. It's us. The storm outside raged harder now, lightning flashing through the windows, throwing their shadows against the walls. Martha's shadow looked tall, steady. Daniel's looked broken, shaking. She turned toward him. Do you remember what your father said before he died? Daniel looked away, ashamed. He told me to take care of you. And you did the opposite, she said softly, but not with anger, with deep, hollow sadness. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I just wanted to prove I wasn't useless. Her expression softened, but tears welled in her eyes. You were never useless. You were just lost? Another thunderclap shook the house, this time followed by a sound beneath their feet. A low, hollow crack. They looked at each other. The basement. It sounded like something or someone had just moved below. Daniel whispered, "No one's been down there in years." Martha's eyes darkened. Then maybe that's where the truth is waiting. And together they turned toward the basement door, the handle rusted, the air growing colder with every step. The air grew colder as Martha placed her trembling hand on the doorknob. The metal was icy, unnaturally cold, like it hadn't been touched for decades. Daniel stood behind her, his breathing shallow. "Maybe it's just the pipes," he said weakly. Martha didn't answer. With a slow turn, the old brass knob clicked, and the door opened with a long, aching creak. A smell of damp earth, mold, and iron wafted up from the darkness. The basement steps were half-rotted, swallowed by shadows that no light seemed able to reach. Martha lit the small flashlight she carried, its weak beam cutting through the air like a blade. "Stay close," she whispered. Daniel hesitated but followed, one hand trailing against the cold wall. Every step echoed too loudly, one after another, hollow, deliberate. The deeper they went, the more the sound seemed to change, like something breathing beneath the floorboards. Daniel whispered, "Mom, what if it's not just memories down here?" Martha didn't look back. "Then we face it together." And as they reached the final step, a faint flicker of movement passed in front of the flashlight beam. Something or someone was already waiting. The light landed on an old wooden box, half buried in dust and cobwebs. It was large, carved with initials, M and R, the same ones from the letters upstairs. Daniel frowned. Dad's initials. Martha nodded slowly. "We buried this after he died." She knelt down, brushing off layers of grime with trembling fingers. The box groaned as she pried it open, revealing stacks of yellowed papers, faded photographs, and an envelope sealed with wax. Daniel picked up one of the photos. It was of the house, brand new, bright, full of light. His father stood beside Martha, holding a young Daniel in his arms. "Why would you hide these?" he asked. Martha's eyes glistened. "Because every picture was a lie." She tore open the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of paper, a deed. Not to the house, but to the business Daniel's father once owned. His father had transferred everything to her before his death. The house, the land, even the company. Daniel's breath caught. "So, you already owned everything?" Martha's voice cracked. "Yes, and I let you take it all from me." Daniel stumbled back, his mind spinning. "Why?" "Because I needed you to learn what power does when you take it without love." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, from behind the old furnace, something metallic fell to the ground with a sharp clang, as if disturbed by their words. The flashlight beam jerked toward the sound. Behind the furnace, a small crawl space yawned open, narrow and dark. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. "What's in there?" Martha raised the light. The beam caught a glint, an old photograph pinned to the wall inside the crawl space. She reached in, pulling it out carefully. The picture showed Daniel as a teenager, standing beside his father. Behind them, in faint reflection, Martha could see her own face in the window, watching from inside the house. But there was something else, a second photo taped behind it. In that one, the reflection in the window wasn't her. It was Daniel, older, wearing the same expression he had now. He stared at it, confusion spreading through him. That's impossible. Martha's voice trembled. No, Daniel. It's not. The house hadn't been haunting them. It had been remembering them, showing them who they'd always been destined to become. Every cruel word, every act of betrayal had been part of a pattern, passed from father to son. Daniel fell to his knees, the photograph shaking in his hands. I became him. Martha knelt beside him. And now you have to decide if you'll end it. The storm above roared louder, the thunder rolling like a verdict. Somewhere upstairs, the front door slammed open on its own. The house seemed to exhale as though it had finally been waiting for this choice. The light died. Total darkness swallowed the basement, thick and oppressive. The only sound was the distant rumble of thunder and Daniel's trembling breath. His voice broke the silence, uncertain, afraid. I'm here, Martha whispered, but her voice seemed farther away than it should have been. He fumbled for his phone, flicking on its flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, but Martha wasn't standing where she had been. The box was open, the papers scattered. Martha? He said louder. Then the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the far corner. He spun the light toward it, revealing not her, but the faint outline of his father's old coat hanging on the wall. It swayed gently, though no air stirred. For a moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. The shape looked almost human, almost alive. Then, behind him, Martha's voice came again, but this time low, sorrowful, and close enough to make him flinch. Daniel, the house remembers everything you've done. He turned, and she was standing inches away, her face illuminated by the dim glow, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. This place doesn't forgive, she whispered. It mirrors. Martha slowly lifted the flashlight, shining it toward a wall Daniel had never seen before. Half of it was covered in cracked mirrors, some large, some small, reflecting the two of them in distorted fragments. In every reflection, they looked slightly different, younger, older, broken, hopeful, furious. It was like watching their lives fracture across glass. Martha stepped closer. Your father built this wall before he died. He said it was for storage, but I think he meant to face himself here. Daniel shook his head. What are you saying? She turned to him, eyes filled with grief. That the men in this house always destroy what they love most, and it always ends here. He stared at his reflection, dozens of them, until one of the mirrors shimmered. The face inside smiled back at him cruelly. And then the glass cracked, a thin line running through his reflection's eye. Daniel stepped back. What was that? The mirrors began to rattle. One by one, the reflections shifted, showing not their faces, but moments from the past, the night he took the house, the lies he told, the letter he forged. Each memory played silently, flickering like old film reels. Daniel sank to his knees, covering his ears. Make it stop, Martha whispered. You can't stop the truth once it's awake. The basement groaned, deep, ancient, as if the foundation itself were breathing. The mirrors shattered in a violent ripple, shards falling like rain. Daniel screamed, covering his head. When he looked up, he saw the reflection of himself still standing, and the fragments all around him. Each piece showed him in a different way. Angry, greedy, desperate, young. The realization hit him like a blow. He hadn't stolen the house because he wanted power. He'd done it because he couldn't stand feeling small. The truth was the punishment. Martha knelt beside him, her hand shaking as she touched his cheek. "Now you understand," she said softly. "The house only takes back what was never yours." He looked around, his breath catching as the walls began to tremble. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the floor split slightly beneath them. Daniel grabbed her hand. "Mom, we have to go." But she didn't move. Her eyes were calm, almost serene. "It's not the house that's ending, Daniel. It's the lie." The light flickered once more, bright, then gone. When the storm outside quieted, only the sound of dripping water remained. The next morning, when the police arrived after neighbors reported the collapse, they found the house still standing, but empty. Only one thing lay in the middle of the basement floor: the broken mirrors, and a photograph of Martha and Daniel smiling in front of the house, untouched, perfect, and impossibly new. In the end, the house stood still, silent yet filled with stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. The son moved far away, living with the regret of his own choices, while the mother continued her quiet life, stronger than ever. She no longer lived in the house, but she owned her peace, something no one could steal again. Years later, when people asked her how she could forgive him, she simply smiled and said, "Because I had already taken back what mattered most, my dignity." The story closes with her walking past the same house she once lost. Now just a reminder that blood may betray, but truth never does.